agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by Cleveland area attorney and Republican factotum, Jay Carson. Hey, Jay. How you doing?
I've been pretty good. Tanned, rested, and ready here. I've been away for a while, so it's good to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. I always enjoy kind of getting back to our original roots and doing the show with you. It's always a lot of fun. Before we get to the show, just a couple quick things. As a number of listeners have noted, we've had some, how will I spin this, variable audio quality lately. And we believe we've worked out all the issues, but I'm going to do more than just give you some kind of a vague promise or anything like that. What I'm going to say is that from this point on, I am actually going to personally check every single piece of audio before it goes out. And if anything is not absolutely up to standards, we're not going to release it. And if that means that I have to do a last minute show about, I don't know about what, but that's what it's going to be. I promise that you are not going to hear any substandard audio from this point on, no matter what. So you have my word on it. And so I'd like to think my word is we'll see. I guess we'll see if my word's worth, right, Jay? But anyway,
Yep.
But yeah, you trust me, Jay, right? I mean, there you go. So anyway.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But anyway, I just wanted to let you know that we do take this seriously, and it is not going to be an issue in the future, period. All right. Second little thing I wanted to mention is, I'm getting...
We can't vouch for content.
What's that?
So we can't vouch for content.
No, certainly not.
It'll sound good.
But at least our musings should sound good, even if they're not coherent, right? So, yeah. Another thing I wanted to mention, Jay, is I am getting ready to teach a class on democracy in America, which I'm creatively calling Democracy in America. But it's kind of, gets into sort of a lot of the stuff that you and I like to talk about and think about just, kind of casually between ourselves, political theory, the founding, the kind of ideals that, and that sort of thing. And so because
I'm all for democracy in America. Mike.
I know you are. Me too. We can agree on that. Absolutely. And so because of that, I've been thinking a lot about democracy and doing a lot of research and that sort of thing. And in doing that, there was actually a podcast that I came across that I really like. I think is a great resource. I'm listening to it, and I thought other people might want to check it out too. It's a podcast called Democracy Works, and basically what they do is every week they look at a different aspect of what it means to live in a democracy, and they have various conversations, academics, authors, activists, that sort of thing. One of their recent episodes that's super useful to me, it was on what Tocqueville would think about democracy in America in 2019, which is pretty cool. And I think I might
was giving you my first question for you about is de Tocqueville going to be as a part of the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why when I saw this podcast episode and I found this podcast, I was like, wow, this is really good stuff. And another thing I really like about them is show notes are oftentimes a weak point in a lot of podcasts. Their show notes are amazing. They have like additional links, discussion questions, interview highlights. I mean, it's pretty impressive. It's actually a collaboration between the McCourtney Institute for Democracy at Penn State University and WPSU, which is the public radio station there. And it's like a weekly thing, great back catalog of events. So I just wanted to promote a show that I think is really worth listening to. So you can just look for Democracy Works in your podcast app. They also have a website, democracyworkspodcast.com. So I think you should really check them out. Anyway, one final thing, Jay, the first batch of mugs and tote bags for Patreon supporters at the $10 or higher per month level, it started to get to people. I don't know if you've seen, but some of our supporters have been posting pictures of their tote bags and mugs on
yes.
Which is really cool. I think they came out really well. And so yeah, if everyone should be getting theirs in the first kind of wave that I sent out by early July, and I'll be sending out the second batch probably sometime in the next week or so. So I hope you look forward to that. Anyway. All right, with that out of the way, before we do get started, we also have some new Patreon monthly supporters. I want to thank Sherna, who's a new supporter, and also a thank you to Brian and Lynn, who both increased their previous level of support on Patreon. And that really, it means a lot to us, and it really helps keep things going. And of course, when you become a monthly sustaining supporter, you get our thanks, a little shout out here, but also various bonus things like bonus shows and a bunch of other things like, mugs and tote bags and things like that. So to check it all out, just go to patreon.com/politics, guys, and you can see all the stuff we have going on there. All right. Well, with that out of the way, I think, Jay, it's time for me to move out of the driver's seat and turn things over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Our first story this week is, of course, going to be the Democratic debates that were held over 2 days with a cast of thousands. As you recall, the Democratic National Committee, in order to sort out who would debate and who would not, set sort of various thresholds based on fundraising, support, and so forth, still had to carry this over 2 nights. It's hard for me to look as far as who came away a winner or a loser. I mean, reading the reports, the notices, as they say, Kamala Harris seems to have shown up well, at least gotten the name out there. People are talking about her. Likewise, Elizabeth Warren, I think most people believe acquitted herself well. Less so Beto O'Rourke. And again, I think we should caution everyone, Mike, that sort of the first snapshots after a debate often aren't accurate, or they change over time. It's like you ever go to see a movie that, like, you come out of the theater saying, "Man, that was really great," and then sort of like the next day you're like, it didn't make sense. I think debates are kind of like that. So I think we should always put that caveat in there as far as instant analysis. But for most of this, I think my first thought for you, Mike, because I think we're on the same page of this, is did the Democratic debates, are we moving forward with democracy? Was this helpful, I guess, for voters and or candidates and or the system, I guess, the way that this was structured? Yeah, well, I think we are largely in agreement on debates, at least as they are constituted currently. I wouldn't even call what we saw a debate, cattle call, maybe something like that. I mean, you think about the format, right? 1 minute to answer questions, 30 seconds of follow-ups, 45-second closing statement. It's ridiculous. It's not a debate. So the word is completely wrong. It's an opportunity to throw out sound bites. Essentially, is what it is. But I get it. And I mean, the media coverage around it, of course, has been insane because it's exactly the sort of thing that plays to the media's strength. With politics as a battle of quips and personalities, and not ideas or policies. But of course, it's ideas and policies that matter in the end to the lives of real Americans. And so I find this just a spectacle more than anything else. Although I would interject, sort of like quips and sound bites matter often in terms of the electability. Right. In terms of is someone getting across and can they raise funds? But no, I'm sort of on the same page with you there, that there's not a lot of substance there, especially at this. I mean, when you have a one-on-one presidential debate, there is necessarily more substance, more time to talk and actually get deep into policy issues. But the time frame, and I should tell people, if you ever I experienced this when I ran for office last year, going to candidates' nights, and you would have this format where it was 1 minute or so, to respond. And in reality, that's barely enough time to get your name out, and so that's really what most of the candidates, I think, were doing here, just trying to get their name out. So, Mike, I mean, did you come away with any impressions of winners, losers, people who outperformed or underperformed? Well, I mean, I came away with the impression that this is just a sad spectacle for democracy, essentially. I mean, and I want to come back to this because that's what I take away from this, more than this ridiculous talk of winners and losers and so forth. I mean, what is it debates? These kind of, I'm air quoting it, debates reward. Well, the reward being quick, being clever, being aggressive, being emotional, and what do they punish, or not reward at least? Being deliberative, thoughtful, and analytical. Now, I want my president to be deliberative, thoughtful, and analytical.
And those aren't things that are going to come out in this kind of food fight type of format. I mean, and if the media just promotes this, that the format promotes this, and you can say, well, what else are you going to do with 20 candidates? Okay, fine. But if you want to promote more kind of a reasoned debate, then you would maybe spread it out with fewer candidates, or you certainly wouldn't have the cheering studio audience type thing. I mean, that's just insane. So they're designing
like a
spectacle.
jumbotron too, kind of, with the little.
Well, and not only that, but you're not allowed to carry notes on stage, which is part of the thing. So we want to reward memory. It's how many of these sound bites can you remember to jump in with? That's junk, basically. This is just sad. It just makes me depressed, Jay. And then the gimmicky raise your hand if you're for abolishing whatever private insurance.
Yeah.
That's stupid too. Because if I were in that position, my feeling would be, well, it depends. I mean, under what conditions? How would it work? How much would it cost? So I just find the whole thing just disgusting and an amazing waste of time and just sad. It makes me depressed, Jay. Now,
all right.
Now, but in terms of what tiny little bits of substance maybe I can pull out of this sad spectacle, I will say that it's not exactly a shock that the candidates are mostly playing to the party base. You would expect that. Yep. Right. And most of them, I think, whoever wins, unless it's, say, Bernie, would come back a little more to the center, and maybe Warren, who are kind of there out on the left flank, that sort of thing. In terms of people who raised themselves above or had a good night or bad night, honestly, certainly the pundits have their thoughts and the super politically engaged people, but that doesn't really matter so much as what the polls are going to say and what the future endorsements say and fundraising numbers and that sort of thing. So it's at this point, Jonathan Bernstein is a political scientist who does a great column and email newsletter for Bloomberg View, said at this point it's all theater criticism, and I love that. I think it.
Right, that's why I said like the notices,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. So it's mostly contentless criticism. But my sense of things is sure there were some people who kind of jumped in there and were able to look pretty good, like Harris. There were some people who didn't do themselves many favors. Andrew Yang, who claimed that his microphone had been cut off, which is why he only talked for had said something like 450 words. I saw based on one.
Mr. Chairman, I'm paying for this microphone. But you know who said that?
That's Ronald Reagan. Absolutely, yeah. But seriously, I thought when Andrew Yang said that, I said, well, yeah, that's what I would do. I would turn off everyone's microphone if they weren't being actually addressed. But of course, that wouldn't lead to the kind of interruptive sort of, fracasses that we get, basically. And then Harris gets the chance to make that line about hey, they don't want to see Americans don't want to see a food fight. We want to see how we're going to put food on people's tables or something. And I groaned and rolled my eyes, but thought, hey, okay, nice shot, but fine, whatever. So, man,
how long did you work on that one?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm with you in that my preference, I would love to see something, like the old William F. Buckley firing line sort of debates of, resolved, here's the question, America should have a single payer healthcare system. And then, the back and forth, that sort of, debate.
Yeah.
I'm maybe a little more sympathetic than you are to this, just because of the nature of you got to do something. I sort of would fall into that of there's no good solution here. But that sort of raises another question that occurred to me 3 a.m. last night is, and I'm interested in your thoughts as a political scientist on this. In the last two presidential elections, we've seen this on the Republican Party and now the Democratic Party with this mass of candidates. It was all total 17 or 18 Republicans who ran, and now we're looking at somewhere 20-ish, 25-ish Democrats who have declared. And that strikes me as different than in years past, right? I mean, before you'd have maybe one or two, or you'd have one person who represents one wing of the party, another who doesn't, like a Reagan Ford type situation, a Kennedy Carter type, or those sorts of sort of things, or even 88. I mean, I thinking back, it was, the joke used to be it was Dukakis and the 7 dwarves or something.
Yep.
But still, you were in single digits of candidates. And I have a theory on what's making this different, and I'm wondering if you've given any thoughts to that.
Well, I think in part it's a sense of when people think an incumbent is particularly vulnerable, and of course, in some races you don't have an incumbent, and so that makes a difference as well. But I think another part of it is that the sort of the gatekeeper role of the parties has broken down, and there are a lot of reasons for that, certainly. But it's a lot easier for somebody to go outside of the party structure and make a name for themselves. And so, for all of those reasons, you see these large numbers of candidates, but. But I would say that one thing that could be done certainly is to just say we're not going to have candidate debates with more than say 5 people at a time or something. Yeah. Then the other people will say, well, you're shutting out our voices. And, my response to that would be, hey, raise more money and get more people to support you, and then we'll consider your voice. But go
get a podcast.
There you go. I'm not unsympathetic for people who believe that they have important views, but not everyone. It's not that not everyone. I won't say. It's not that not everyone has a right to be on the stage. Well, I guess it is that not everyone has a right to be on the stage. Actually, I mean, because this isn't about getting in every little nuance of view and making sure every single voice is heard from. This is about, I think it should be about, providing something that's of use and substance to the American people. And with this many voices, you simply can't do it. There are other forums for candidates to get their message out. And I understand why all these candidates want that national stage and so forth, but it hurts the entire process if anyone who has polling over 1% or whatever it is gets on the stage, and you have the travesty that resulted.
You could get that.
Yeah, I would say not just here now, but you saw the same sort of thing with the Republicans in 2016. Yeah. So
yeah. Well, I mean, I would say I think you're sort of right on the first one, sort of wrong on the first, in that it's a weak incumbent. Because I thought about that too. Is it just everybody wants to run against Trump because they think they got a shot? And okay, yeah, I get that. That could be part of it. I think the second reason that you cited, the breakdown of sort of party discipline, and I would even go make it a little different and say sort of party dynasties it has changed this. And I think if you look at the 2016 election, it was in some ways kind of the end of the Bush dynasty, right? That it had really kind of, I don't want to say controlled, but certainly was hegemonic, let's put it that way, in the Republican Party. It started out, the favorite was going to be Jeb Bush, and as he started collapsing, everyone else sort of just raced in to fill that vacuum. And I think you might be able to you can make the same argument for Democrats this year, in that the Clinton dynasty is over, and there is this sort of power vacuum, and it's
sure,
partly the party and partly candidates who had an outsized influence in the party.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, with any other debates discussion, I think we should probably move on to something that is more substantive. And that it was a big week for John Roberts this week, who is in some ways sort of some say echoing the Anthony Kennedy sort of it's his country, you just live in it. Others see his decisions as kind of thoughtful, long-term, playing the long game. So the first big Supreme Court decision that came out this week had to do with gerrymandering, partisan gerrymandering. There were 3 cases that came up from various circuits that the court heard together regarding whether partisan makeup of a congressional district could be subject to judicial review, essentially. Roberts, writing for the court, writing for a 5-4 majority, found and held that the question of gerrymandering was simply not a justiciable question. Rather, it is a political question, that the founders entrusted this process. They understood it to be political, and they entrusted it to a political body, political process, and the judiciary doesn't really have a role in jumping in here, because it would be too difficult for the judiciary to come up with a single rule or standard to apply across the board. Now, the dissent echoed that, well, yeah, but it's really bad now. Sort of the gerrymandering is really bad now, particularly because of the technology that we have to reduce maps to sort of a granular level to figure out where people voting, what their preferences are. So it's more pernicious. It's more a threat to democracy. And notably for a standard, though, throughout sort of it's a kind of we know it when we see it kind of standard. So my thoughts, obviously, were I think the court got this right, or the majority got this right. That the Constitution, there's nothing in the Constitution about the right to have your party represented. There's certainly a right to avoid voter dilution. One man, one vote. There's also a right that's been created through our 14th Amendment and through the Civil Rights and through the Voting Rights Act about being able to not discriminate by race in crafting districts. But anyway, Mike, what are your thoughts now that we have an actual decision on this?
Well, I don't agree with the majority, but and that shouldn't surprise you in our previous
Sure.
Conversations about this. But I do respect at least Chief Justice Roberts' reasoning, and actually in a string of decisions. And we'll talk, I imagine, about the census decision in a little bit here. But what's really one of the bigger points that's come out to me is that even though John Roberts and I are on opposite sides of the aisle in terms of, to a certain extent, in terms of constitutional interpretation, in terms of ideology, there's an integrity and a consistency in his thinking and in his rulings that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. Now, in this case, his argument was essentially that this is a political question because there's no clear and definable standard. And I think that's a reasonable position to take. I disagree with it because I believe that in recent years, the social science research has developed a standard that I believe is clear and workable. And of course, the dissenters believe that as well. But again, I can see where you could be a reasonable person and say, no, this isn't a clear enough standard. I think that's a wrong position, but I get it. And I also get the argument that, well, if we don't have a clear standard, then we're just making this up as we go along. I think that's absolutely right. And so, but I get the argument as well that, well, if we look at 2018, 5 states actually passed laws to make redistricting less partisan, including Ohio, as you know, Jay. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the argument is well, maybe part of the reason why Roberts was inclined to go in this direction, because he's the new swing justice, and even though he's a little more conservative than Kennedy, he's thankfully a lot less full of himself than Kennedy, which is nice. But anyway, that's kind of a side point. That the problem here, it seems to me, is, there are 24 states that don't have referenda or initiatives. And so they can't do this sort of thing. So while we're seeing a certain amount of momentum, even in red states like Ohio, and Ohio now is, I would say a red state, there's no recourse, I would say, in almost half of the states. And so I fundamentally agree with that, the saying that you hear a lot now, that the constituency should choose their representatives and not the representative choosing their constituency. But I get that this is a tough question. I think it was wrongly decided.
Say, but people in states, they still elect their representatives, they elect their governors. And I think that's a lot what Roberts was saying. He wasn't saying there's no room for improvement or gerrymandering isn't a problem. It's that this is not a problem for the court.
He was saying essentially he went as far as to say it was, kind of a threat to democracy, really, but it's just nothing we can do anything about. So I agree with him about the threat to democracy thing, but not about the nothing we can do anything about. Now, go ahead.
Well, I was going to interrupt. The other piece that Roberts mentioned, and I didn't mention in the intro, was of course public policy concerns. And I'm always one of these people who, like, if you're in court and you're arguing public policy would dictate, that's kind of a tell that you've got sort of a weak hand. You know what I mean? In this case, it's or you do what the court sort of did in this case, is you tack on the public policy argument to the end. but I think there is a public policy case to be made here in that if you look at what happened in, say, Pennsylvania, where you essentially had courts redrawing districts, and you have this, because of the way partisan politics operates, you will have multiplicity of lawsuits up to right before filing deadlines, during filing deadlines. You'll have injunctions, you'll have appeals of injunctions, and you really get this sort of, craziness and distrust that then is built into the system. I think there's something to that.
Well, yeah, well, like I said, I think, though, that there is a clear standard. It's a workable standard, and the majority erred in not adopting that standard. But that aside, I also think that there's no question that the process of redistricting has an inherently partisan element. Now, that's, of course, made a lot worse by modern technology and so forth. But I guess my bigger problem is if you take a look at just in general congressional districts, there's one district in Ohio, and I forget which district it is, but it's this mass.
My district.
What's that?
My district.
No, I'm thinking about that's one of them. That kind of
the snake on the lake.
But there's another one that goes from like northeastern Ohio almost all the way down the entire kind of the entire kind of eastern edge of this entire state. And Ohio's not, kind of the largest state. But the fundamental idea that the framers had of these kind of, contiguous, geographically compact sort of district that represent communities of interest, that's gone. That's gone in so many places. And so I think we need to look to different solutions. And so what I've been thinking about a lot lately, actually as a way around this, is multi-member districts with ranked choice voting. I mean, I'm still not totally sold on it, and I need to do a little more research and so forth, especially in concerning how it would be implemented. But the idea basically is, among other good things that would happen because of it, in theory, is that it would make gerrymandering less of an issue, almost take it off of the table in a way, because it would be incredibly difficult to shut the other party out. Just to give you kind of an example, Jay, and again, I'm just kind of early stages on this, but
sure.
Okay, California has 53 congressional districts now, which, wow, it's something.
That's a lot.
But under, say, a multi-member district plan, that would maybe become 14 districts. 12 of those districts would have 4 representatives, 2 would have 3 representatives, and then the leading 4 vote getters would be the people who would win those positions and would represent those districts, basically. And the likelihood here, based on everything I've seen, is that it would not only make it much, much harder to essentially gerrymander a party out of representation, but also it would allow, if you bring in ranked choice voting, it would bring in, make it possible to bring in more minor parties, give them kind of a toehold and bring more of those kind of views in. So to me, that makes a lot more sense.
That's a good thing, because
it's a good thing because people who have legitimate interest should have a way to have them represented and shouldn't be just kind of shut out because they can't manage to get a plurality. And it's something that's done in all kinds of other systems. In fact, ranked choice voting and multi-member districts are things that have been done and are being done in plenty of places in the United States. And not only that, but multi-member districts were very common in the United States Congress up until around the 1840s. So this is not any kind of wild radical thing that's in breaking with our democratic traditions here in the United States. So, but again, I'm saying at this point, I'm not totally sold. I need to think a lot more
Still
about
work in
this.
progress.
But yeah, more to come on this, certainly.
Okay. Well, moving on, the next Supreme Court case dealt with the attempt by the Commerce Department to add a question to the census regarding citizenship. And again, this is a Judge Roberts sort of pivot where he wrote the opinion for the court, but essentially sided with the more liberal wing to the extent we can say this is a decision on the merits. And the court ended up rejecting putting the question on the census as it stands now and remanded it to the lower court for basically more fact finding. So my first thought is one. I mean, it's not necessary. It is in some ways a decision on the merits, in other ways it's not. and courts can often, you can never go wrong by remanding for more fact finding. I'm just going to say that's sort of a fact of life, sort of the ultimate kind of punt. No one will ever fault you for that. I suppose some conservatives have faulted Roberts for this. But this case turned on the question of sort of deference to an agency, but also the agency's sincerity and the reasons that they would give for whatever change they want to make. So in this case, the purported reason for the Commerce Department to add this question to the census was to make sure districts are fair, correct, according to the Voting Rights Act. And on its face, that's not a bad reason, and that's a good reason. It's a true reason. But the court found that, look, that wasn't really their actual reason. I think that gets into a sort of a difficult area for courts determining sort of the sincerity of bureaucrats who put these orders out. That said, I think Roberts is very much playing the long game. He sort of sees where he wants to go, or where the court ought to go on these deference questions and administrative law questions, which quite honestly, between I think Mike, you and I agree that this is one of the big issues of our time. And I think he's charting a course, and he's kind of bringing people along here and there. But what are your thoughts? So I mean, many conservatives were disappointed by the decision. I am less so. I'm sort of again, he's picking his battles.
Well, I don't think he's picking his battles. I think that he just saw he looked at the facts of the case, and he made the right decision on this, because I think he's
right. And let me jump in by picking his battles. That's kind of what I mean.
Okay.
Is that, look, if you're going to make some big statement on administrative review or deference that it's given to an administrative agency, it's sort of like you want to pick the case that has the right facts to do that.
Yeah, and
I think you recognize this one doesn't.
And in this sense, in terms of granting deference, I mean, the problem here was that essentially, while there are two questions, as you pointed out, can the Commerce Department add a citizenship question to the census, and if so, was this done in accordance with the Administrative Procedures Act, basically, which means that...
And the court seems to imply, I mean, again, that the question wasn't necessarily before it, but it seems to imply that, yes, the Commerce Department could add such a question.
Yeah, and I think that seemed pretty clear to me in the majority opinion. But as they point out, this whole after-the-fact reasoning, I mean, the point from the opinion, right? He said that, well, the secretary was determined to reinstate the question from the time he entered office. He instructed his staff to make it happen, waited while Commerce officials explored whether another agency would request census-based citizenship data, subsequently contacted the Attorney General himself to ask if the Department of Justice would make the request, and adopted the Voting Rights Act rationale late in the process. I mean, they totally screwed this up. And I think the decision was right in the sense they said, hey, come on, this is totally a rationalization and not a legitimate reason. Now, you have the right to add this question, but if you're going to do that, you need to tell us what your real reason is. And that's what they did. That's why they sent it down to say, hey, we're going to give you a chance to give your real reason. Now, the chances are that they're not going to be able to come up with anything, especially there's some differences as to when the deadline is, but by the end of October. And of course, there are other challenges also working their way through courts about, with that data on, or that information on Thomas Hofeller, the Republican redistricting guy. So my guess is how this is going to play out is that the form's going to have to go out without the citizenship question. We'll see, but it seems to me pretty clearly that the administration screwed up in doing this in a big way. And I think, thankfully, because I don't think a citizenship question should be on the census, and they botched this, and I think that's going to be to the detriment of Republicans and to a positive for having an actual accurate count of all the people in the country. And that's, of course, what the census is supposed to do.
No. Well, I mean, I disagree with you on the merits of whether the question ought to be there and whether it's a accurate count. I would agree with you 100% that this was it was reminiscent of the travel ban cases, right, where the Trump administration sort of pushed out this rule, and then sort of after the fact kind of did the fact finding to support it and got kicked back a couple times and revamped the rule, did new findings, and finally got it right. So there's a disappointment in that, can't you get this right the first time? Because again, I think there were plenty of good reasons why a citizenship question should be on the census. And moreover, the court recognized it's okay to have political motives along with, or it's okay to have mixed motives or multiple motives. But what you have to do is when you put this out, you have to articulate at least one, real reason that you're doing this, and you can have as many other reasons as you like behind that.
And just to be clear, your reason can't be to suppress the political power of a minority group. That's not a constitutionally okay reason under the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. Now you paused. I mean, you have issues with the Equal Protection Clause, or what's the deal here? You just need to think about that.
No, I was just thinking. I mean, again, the voting rights rationale would actually be you would be supporting minority rights if you're using it for that. And I'm not sure how exactly you would be disadvantaging minorities.
Sure, you are. You are, because now you don't believe this because you reject the opinion of the people who who've done census stuff and have studied this for their entire careers and are experts, and that certainly that's your way. No, let me finish. That's your prerogative to reject the opinion of these experts, but it seems pretty clear the consensus of them is that adding this question will actually lead to a significant undercount of Hispanics. Now, you don't have to believe that. I will side with the people who do this for a living and have done it for, in many cases, decades, and you can side with whatever logic you feel you want to side with on this.
All right. Well, my logic on, again, going to the merits of it, is that, look, I think it's important for a country to know how many citizens it has.
Sure, but that doesn't have to happen on the census.
And I think it's important for a country to know how that measure changes from decade to decade.
Well, not only that, Jay, I'd agree with you. It's important to know how it changes even in smaller increments than that, and that's why a citizenship question is regularly included on the American Community Survey, which the Census Department puts out on a regular basis, and that's pretty accurate data, actually. And there are some.
But you're not worried about undercount for the American Community Survey, but you would have an undercount for the census.
Well, I'm worried about an undercount just in general.
You're saying no. I get what you're saying. You're saying because the census, though, is used specifically for districting, voting, that sort of thing, whereas the other is more just a tool to gather demographic information.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think it's very important to know a lot of these things, but I think we need to make sure that the census, which is designed to do one specific thing, does it as well as possible. And if we need additional instruments or things to do other things, hey, I'm absolutely open to that, but I just think we need to focus on what the primary purpose of the census is and make sure that it provides the most accurate enumeration of all the people in this country as it possibly can. Everything else is secondary to that.
Okay, fair enough. Hey, and so one more Supreme Court hit this week. Again, involving administrative law. This was the case, Kaiser versus Wilkie. It involved a Vietnam veteran who had applied for benefits from the VA and had been turned down by bureaucrats who hate injured veterans. No, but actually, it goes. The facts are sort of convoluted. Of he appealed, and then what reasons can he give for supporting his disability, and the VA said no, we don't accept those reasons. So it went up, and this turned on not necessarily. Well, I guess it is deference. The Auer doctrine. That's AUER, not like the time
or R measurement. Or our doctrine as opposed to their doctrine. Yeah.
Yeah. But what the Auer doctrine says is that an administrative agency is going to be given deference when it is determining the meaning of its own rules, the rules it promulgates. And the reason behind this is, well, they're the group that wrote them, right? So they ought to have the best idea of what it means. Secondarily, the administrative agency is arguably the agency that would have the most expertise in regarding, how the rule operates in the real world. So it would be best to do that. And again, Roberts joined with the more liberal justices here. But again, he seems to be carving out his own path a little bit. In the one hand, he does not overrule Auer, but sort of sets up some parameters. And I think he didn't write this opinion. The opinion was written by Justice Kagan, who noted that the Auer doctrine and deference is potent in its place, but cabined in its scope. Yeah, I really nice, like that. It's kind of, you don't get, judicial poetry as often as you ought to, but, but so what sort of we ended up with is, yes, the Auer doctrine stands, but, again, it's one of those picking your battles, I think. And I think this was a case where, bad facts could have made bad law. So the deference remains intact, but the court sort of specified when that deference would apply, and it only comes in when there's ambiguity in the statute, and it only comes in if the interpretation first has to be reasonable also. So any thoughts on this, and I guess sort of just the larger arc of John Roberts' week here?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I first wanted to point out that we've talked about this issue before, but we've talked about it more commonly in terms of what's called Chevron deference. And just to be clear on the distinction for folks is that our deference is about granting agencies discretion in interpreting their own rules and regulations, whereas Chevron is about granting agencies discretion in interpreting legislative mandates. So something doesn't...
Exactly. Congressional mandates aimed at that agency.
Exactly. And so...
But they're really kind of pretty close cousins.
Yeah, certainly. But yeah, I think there's an important distinction. And so, another thing I found was interesting is that in Auer, which was decided in 1997, it was a unanimous decision, and actually Justice Scalia wrote the opinion. And to me, it's interesting because it, to me, is maybe a signal or a sense of how far the court has moved to the right, at least on this issue, in the preceding 2 decades. Because Scalia certainly was no squishy liberal type, far the opposite, right, from that. And this was a unanimous decision from, 22 years ago, essentially. And what I take away from this is I think the majority got it right, certainly. I think they constrained our deference a little more than I would have liked to have seen. But it seems to me that the court's 4 most conservative members, at least in this area, are basically saying that, hey, we're fans of judicial activism if it allows us to kind of further a deregulatory agenda, basically. So I think I do not get the dissenting conservative justice. I think that I know Gorsuch especially was just all in a tizzy about this, basically feeling that, it was a failure of nerve on the part of Roberts and so forth. And I just think, wow, that's like the epitome of conservative judicial activism right there. So I was happy with the decision. Again, I think it was I was disappointed with some of the decisions, the big decisions at the end of the term, but I think it was a great week for John Roberts, who even though I disagree with him on a lot of policy things, to me, he is almost certainly the most kind of, he's an impressive Chief Justice. I think he's doing exactly the job that a Chief Justice is supposed to do. And great job, John Roberts.
Yeah. Well, one thing in response to the Judicial Act, I think the argument counter to that would be the administrative state has grown considerably since Auer and since Scalia wrote that opinion, and it's almost sort of a flip side of the argument that the liberals made in the gerrymandering, in that, look, it's just, yeah, it's been a problem for a while, but it's a lot worse now. That said, I'm going to hit you with one other Supreme Court case, and I know it's not fair because this wasn't on our list of stuff we're going to talk about, but I just wanted to note it because it kind of fits in with this theme, and that was Gundy versus U.S. There was a 5-3 vote, and this time Justice Alito joined with the more liberal members of the court. And this case turned on the delegation clause. And I raise this just because this is something you and I talk about a fair amount, and it kind of ties into this same idea. The delegation clause is something that is not often talked about, but basically it says, Congress can't just delegate its legislative powers to someone else. And again, it's of a kind of this same sort of administration. In this case, the powers were delegated. It wasn't Congress; it was a state court. Delegated the determination on whether someone had to register as a sex offender to that's a state's attorney general. And the court said, well, this isn't really his job to do that. That has to be done by legislation. So Alito joined with the majority, but said, look, I think we ought to take another look at this, under a different case. And that's sort of, again, my sense that some of the conservatives on the court are playing the long game, right? They're looking for the case that has the best facts. And I think that's good. I don't mean that sounds sort of sinister, but as I said before, it's sort of a common saying that, bad facts make bad law. And I just thought that was interesting too. And again, Gorsuch was really, because this is one of his pet peeves, is this whole delegation to administrative agencies.
Yeah. And I get the argument, and I think certainly in theory I have a fair amount of sympathy for that argument, as you and I talked about, But and I think it's undeniable that Congress has acted irresponsibly in delegating away too much of its authority to the executive for a whole host of reasons. But I think what happens in practice here, in the court saying this, well, we're not going to grant this deference, is the effect on the ground is that, well, we'll just figure it out ourselves. We 9 unelected justices will just decide what makes sense, as opposed. And so, to me, that's not solving the problem. That's just basically still a problem with Congress not, acting as it should. Right. But I would rather.
Well, that's why I added the Gundy case, because it's sort of the right. There's two pieces of this. The reason that there's an administrative issue is often because courts aren't holding feet to the fire on delegation.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I mean, I would like to, that's something that I know you and I have talked about in the past, and I'm hoping we'll have a much more extended conversation about that, or discussion about that in the future, because I think that's a huge issue, certainly, and I don't really necessarily see any easy solutions to it, but because it would require Congress to act in a way that's sort of against the interest of many of the members of Congress, right? But yeah, and I don't know that the judiciary is really in a position to force this issue, and this might actually come back to, well, is this in a sense a political question, or a justiciable type of issue? And I don't know that it necessarily is, in trying to somehow judicially inject backbone in Congress or responsibility in Congress. I think that's a broader question for our democracy.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Congress, we had one other congressional story to go with here, and that was the border funding bill.
Oh yeah.
So I think we have time just to mention it briefly. This bill started in the Senate, the Republican-controlled Senate, but had significant Democrat backing there. It would provided I don't have the number in front of me, for some $4.6 billion for $4.6 billion in emergency spending for the humanitarian crisis at the border. This was a bipartisan thing where most people thought yes, because of just the conditions there that we've seen, particularly in the last week or so. The House Democrats had another piece that they wanted included in it that had to do with protection for migrant children. And what happened was, when it went to the it came back with that from the House, and then the Senate essentially, just passed the
Yeah, well, I mean, there was a.
I'm stumbling on my words.
Well, no,
Mike.
it's
Been a long
because
time.
I get it. I mean, certainly, you would want to highlight the dissension within the Democratic ranks, and
Of course,
I mean, there were
of course.
these certainly on the left flank of the party, and including Pelosi, who wanted to push through a number of what I think are good and smart restrictions
Right.
on how the administration could spend this money, and also a provision that would allow members of Congress to visit these facilities unannounced. Now, and she got some pretty serious pushback from Democratic centrists, which is why they kind of had to abandon this, because they're basically saying, hey, this is a serious crisis. We need to take care of this right away.
We don't have time for this. We can deal with
and
it
also,
later.
I should point out that at least there was supposedly, we don't have official word on this, but an informal agreement between Pelosi.
Between Schumer.
Well, no, between Pelosi and Vice President Pence, said that they were going to try to administratively implement the 90-day limit on keeping children in those initial facilities, and also an agreement to notify Congress within 24 hours after the death of a child in custody. And that's not as good as having it in law. But again, given the nature of this crisis, and many of us have seen the horrible pictures and the conditions in the one facility in Texas and so forth, something needed to be done. Pretty clearly, the system is completely overwhelmed. And I think for the most part, as I said on the Facebook group this week, that I think largely the people who are dealing with this massive flow of immigrants coming in, they're just completely overwhelmed. And when you're that overwhelmed, even if you have the best intentions in the world, bad things happen, bad decisions get made, and we need to put everything else to the side and do just what Congress did and get that aid to these folks so we can take care of this awful humanitarian crisis. And so I think Congress did the right thing here.
I agree with you. I think that's exactly right, and I think you make a good point in that our system was set up largely to deal with single males who are crossing the border looking for work, and the whole idea of family, and again, not necessarily in mass. And now with the caravans with families, it's a different sort of problem. You need different facilities, and our both the infrastructure and also I would say the legal infrastructure. I mean, the Flores settlement and so forth, just were not our as Lincoln might say, are inadequate to our time.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, with that, we have a bit of bipartisan agreement. I think we can take a break here, and then you and I will be back on the bonus show.
Yeah, and what are we talking about this week, Jay?
Oh, I think we're talking about Iran, and we're talking about the G20.
Oh, yeah, all kinds of stuff, the G20.
And whatever else comes
and
up.
So, obviously, if you're a supporter, that should be, if we're doing our job, should be in your app by the time you actually hear this. And if you want to hear it and get all the other stuff that you can get as a supporter, it's patreon.com/politicsguys. Also, Jay, I didn't tell you this. This is a surprise thing to almost everyone. Will and Kristen are hoping to do a special show just on the Democratic debates, sort of a kind of two, Will and Kristen, both from right center, kind of two from the right, discuss 20 from the left sort of thing.
Right.
If they're able to work out the logistics, I think they were talking about doing it Sunday if they can. We're going to put that up on our Patreon site, but we're going to make it available to everyone, whether you're a Patreon supporter or not. Of course, if you get there and you decide you want to become a supporter, hey, it's just a click away. That'd be great. But anyway, that's patreon.com/politicsguys. I'll try to get it up by Monday, certainly at the latest. And of course, if you want to get in touch with us, mail@politicsguys.com is the best way. There's also our Facebook page. There was a amazing discussion on, of course, the Democratic debates and a lot of other stuff. That's facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter @politicsguys. And hey, if you haven't subscribed to the show yet, that would be a big help. Please do so. And we love to get your comments. They're always helpful and interesting. Some of them are actually kind of funny. This week, Jay, we had a comment on Castbox. Someone said, "You are an embarrassment to Polish people everywhere." I like,
meaning you, of course. Not
I don't know
me,
if he was talking about me or Brian Smetkowski, because now we have two Polish commentators, but whatever. So on behalf of Polish people everywhere, I acknowledge that comment and respectfully disagree. Anyway, the executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, and Benji Fishman. Today's show is produced by Jay Carson and Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Wednesday. We hope you'll join us.